All right, let's set sail into one of the most just game-changing periods in all of human history, the Age of Exploration.
So how did this even happen? I mean, think about it. You've got a handful of kingdoms in Europe that basically redraw the entire map of the world in just a couple of centuries. It's wild. This is the era that for the very first time wove the whole globe together with sea lanes. But, and this is a huge but, that connection, it came at a staggering cost. So let's get into the how and the why of it all.
Okay, so to really get the why, you have to picture Europe back in the 15th century. They were kind of on the outside looking in when it came to global trade. All the good stuff, the really lucrative trade with Asia, that was controlled by wealthy Italian city-states. And let me tell you, the other European powers were desperate to get a piece of that action.
And driving this whole ambition was this really powerful economic theory called mercantilism. The idea was pretty straightforward. There's only so much wealth in the world, like a giant pie. And if you want your nation to be more powerful, you need to grab the biggest slice. That meant hoarding as much gold and silver as you possibly could and making sure you were always selling more than you were buying. This wasn't just economics, it turned global politics into this super intense, cutthroat competition for cash.
So what you end up with is this potent mix of motivations. Historians often boil it down to the 3 Gs: gold, God, and glory. Gold is pretty obvious, right? It's that drive for wealth we just talked about. God was this powerful religious mission to spread Christianity far and wide. And glory? Well, that was all about national pride and rivalry. Every kingdom wanted to one-up the others. A bigger empire meant more power, more prestige. You get the picture.
Okay, so who made the first big move? That would be Portugal. You know, a pretty small country, kind of tucked away on the edge of Europe, but they had massive ambitions on the high seas.
And it makes a lot of sense when you just look at a map, right? They were basically cornered by their much bigger rival Spain. So their only real path for expansion was out into the open ocean. They decided to play the long game, just methodically, step by step, pushing their way down the coast of Africa, hoping to find a sea route around it all the way to Asia.
And what's really crucial to understand here is that this was not an overnight success, not even close. I mean, we're talking about a slow, incredibly expensive, and super dangerous process that took almost 100 years. It was a grind. You see the steps here. Prince Henry starts funding the expeditions, then Diaz finally makes it around the southern tip, and then, at last, Vasco da Gama follows that route all the way to India. Each trip was like adding a new piece to the puzzle, building on what the last crew had learned.
This led to Portugal's really clever strategy. Look, they knew they were a small country. They couldn't conquer huge swaths of land. So instead, they built what's known as a trading post empire. Think of it like this. They didn't try to own the whole building. They just wanted to control all the doors. They seized key coastal ports, set up forts, and created this network that let them completely dominate the spice trade without needing a massive army to rule over millions of people.
All right, so while all this is happening, Portugal's biggest rival, Spain, is watching and getting pretty antsy. They saw Portugal's success and knew they had to do something big to catch up. So they decided to take a huge, radical gamble.
And that gamble was betting on an idea from some guy named Christopher Columbus. His pitch was simple. Forget that long, tedious route around Africa. He claimed the fastest way to get to Asia was to just sail west, straight across the Atlantic. He was hunting for a shortcut, right? But what he found instead, well, it would change the course of history.
And this is just wild. It shows you the sheer, well, arrogance of the time. Only 2 years after Columbus's first voyage, Spain and Portugal literally sat down, with the Pope's help, and drew a line on a map of the world. Everything to the east of the line, Portugal's. Everything to the west, Spain's. Just like that, they carved up the entire known and unknown world between the two of them. Incredible.
And it turns out, Spain had just hit the absolute jackpot. Columbus didn't find Asia, no. But he did open the door to the Americas, where they found the massive, incredibly wealthy Aztec and Inca empires. And just like that, the whole game changed. The goal wasn't about finding a trade route anymore. It was about full-on conquest and grabbing unimaginable amounts of treasure, especially silver.
That silver, mined from the Americas, became the engine for the world's first truly global supply chain. It's fascinating. You have silver being dug out of the ground in places like Potosi, then it's loaded onto these huge Spanish ships, sailed all the way across the Pacific to the Philippines, and from there it's traded for Chinese silk and porcelain. So much of this silver ended up in China that it actually became the main currency of their entire economy. It literally rewired world trade.
So you can imagine, news of Spain's insane wealth just spread like wildfire back in Europe. And it kicked off this frantic scramble.
All the other big players were looking at Spain and thinking, we have got to get in on this. They were terrified of being left behind. So the new kids on the block, we're talking England, France, and the Dutch, they all jumped into the race. At first, they were all obsessed with finding their own shortcut to Asia, this mythical Northwest Passage they thought went through North America. Spoiler alert, they never found it. But while they were looking, they started claiming huge chunks of land and building their own empires.
And what's interesting is that they all went about it a little differently. The French, up in Quebec, were all about the fur trade, which meant building relationships with the native tribes. The Dutch set up New Amsterdam, what we now call New York, as basically a giant trading hub. It was all about commerce. But the English at Jamestown, they had a totally different plan. They wanted land. They were there to create permanent farming settlements. And that approach, well, it would have massive consequences later on.
Now, for a long time, Spain's navy, the Armada, was seen as basically invincible. They ruled the seas. But then came 1588, a huge turning point. England's much smaller navy, with a big assist from some terrible weather, actually defeated the Spanish Armada. It was a total shock. It completely shattered that myth of Spanish invincibility, and all of a sudden, the seas were open. It was a green light for English and Dutch colonization on a whole new scale.
So let's step back. After all of this competition, this conquest, this discovery, what's the big takeaway? What was the lasting impact? What kind of world did it all create?
Well, the legacy is, it's huge. And it's complicated. On the one hand, you have a world that's truly connected for the first time ever, a global network of trade that transformed these European states into superpowers. But there's a dark side, a flip side to that coin. That connection came at an unbelievable cost. It laid the groundwork for centuries of European dominance, and it brought absolute devastation to so many other parts of the world.
And let's be really, really clear about this. For the indigenous peoples of the Americas, for the millions of Africans captured and forced into slavery, this was not an age of discovery. Not at all. As the quote says, European arrivals meant death, disease, and genocide. For them, it was an age of invasion, of conquest, and of catastrophe.
So that leaves us with a really tough question, doesn't it? Was this age of exploration more about connection? Or was it more about conquest? Was it about bringing the world together? Or was it about tearing other worlds apart? The honest answer is, it was both. And that complicated, messy legacy is something we are absolutely still grappling with today.